Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Hard Truth. Thank you so much for watching. Listen, why don't you go ahead and subscribe and become a member so you can join in on all the fun? Okay, today I want to talk to you about some information I found regarding the DNA in this Idaho 4 case and this so called IgG family tree genealogical masterpiece. All right. So if you want to know what I found, you know what time it is, right? Grab that coffee, a nice cup of tea as we begin our story. I just wanted to see what would happen if I put Ryan Kohberger in for Ancestry and see if I could get some names. I found two things that were very interesting. The first thing is that no matter how I entered the information or how much I put in, the only person that had hints was the father, Michael Kohberger. He was the only one that had hints throughout the whole session. And I tried to record some of it, but I wasn't switching screens and I thought I was. So I have to show you screenshots. But Michael Kohberger kept popping up with the leaf for hint. As you can see, he has three hints. All right, just off the rip, he had three hints. And so I'm thinking that this is why they said they got his DNA out of the trash because he is the easiest one to match. There was a boatload of information for Mr. Kohberger when it was like pulling teeth to find anything for Mrs. Kohberger, Miss Marianne Kohberger. And there was nothing for Brian. I don't know if it was scrubbed or I needed the advanced search, but Mr. Kohberger was very easy to find and he had hints instantly. And so I'm thinking this is why they chose him to say this is who they got the DNA from. The second thing that I found very, very interesting is that somebody was adding, okay, as I was adding information to the tree, I added Mr. Kohberger's mother. And when I added his mother, her obituary came up from 1999. But somebody added her obituary, added her information January the 5th, 2023. So why would somebody be updating the Kohberger's family tree 5 days after his arrest? All right, that's serious for me. Now, I wanted to know who was updating Mr. Kohberger's family tree information. So I opened up the obituary that was added by Marilyn Sawyer. It says it was originally shared on the 4th of January from newspapers.com. And it says that Miss Sawyer was in Elmira, New York. It also says there at the bottom that the information was saved by 7 different people. And 2 of them are just initials. You can't really tell who it is. And the other 5 are just, more investigation. But anyway, after looking at this, I want to know who Miss Sawyer was. And so, even though it says she lives in Elmira, New York, or that's where she was when she shared the information, I looked her up and she is in her 60s. And according to Ancestry, she lives in Georgia. I found one Marilyn Sawyer in Hiram, Georgia, 64 years old. She's had like 12 different addresses. And I haven't found any link between her and the Kohbergers to where she would be interested in their family tree. I don't understand why she really didn't want to leave a trail for sharing it, but there's something up with that. Okay, so also Mr. Kohberger had three hints and they looked new. All of it said new. So even though I only showed obituary, it's possible that all three of those hints were new, shared in January. And so they had started building the Kohberger tree right after his arrest. That's huge to me. Absolutely huge. What do you think about this one? Now let's look at the state's DNA claim again quickly. He said all four victims died from apparent knife wounds. That's not necessarily true. They have no idea what weapon or weapons were used in the Idaho 4 case. Okay, just because a K-bar sheath was left there does not mean that the murder weapon is a knife. All right, that's not necessarily true. The Idaho State Lab in Meridian, Idaho, located DNA on the K-bar knife sheath. The ISP laboratory determined the DNA came from a single source and that the source was male. Now, Howard Bloom said that when they sent it to the lab in Idaho, there was no DNA at all on the sheath. All right? No DNA at all. All right? But given the benefit of the doubt, let's move on to the next place that they say the DNA went. Now they're doing an STR on the DNA that they claim Idaho performed. This is when they start describing the process of genealogy, saying unable to find a match STR. They decided to use IgG. Then they spent 3 paragraphs explaining the IgG process. And finally, they started talking about what they did. It says, in this case, investigators used IgG. The Idaho State Police utilized a private laboratory. This wasn't in the PCA, all right? This is new information. So it went to the private lab, and even when it got to the private lab, this is when they were supposed to have Mr. Kohberger's DNA to compare it with. And this is when Howard Bloom said that they had Mr. Kohberger's DNA out of the trash, and the Texas lab compared it to whatever the Texas lab found from the sample because Idaho didn't find anything. This is what Bloom said. All right. And so now we see it says the FBI uploaded the S&P profile from the private lab. So this is the third time that the DNA passes hands. And it's just mind boggling that this process, Ann Taylor called it bizarre, complex tree building experiment. And I agree that that's what it was. But the DNA has moved. This is the third time. Okay. And so after the FBI built the family tree using the same tools and methods used by members of the public, they didn't use FBI resources. They used the same thing I just used. One of these things you can log into and add information. Anybody can add. Marilyn Sawyer was adding. So, and I could have added. So right there, this is going to be a problem for the prosecution because anybody can add information to those trees. And I just showed you evidence that somebody added information to Michael Kohberger's mother on the 5th. All right. This is like Wikipedia. You can go in and change the information of Wikipedia. Anybody can. All right. This DNA has moved 4 times. It moved from Idaho to the lab, from the lab to the FBI, and from the FBI back to the lab. That's 1, 2, 3. It moved at least 3 times. And so the DNA is a problem. And I just feel like the profile was built recently. I believe that they did not have his DNA when he was arrested. And I believe that they started building a case for the DNA evidence after his arrest. That's what I believe. Okay. Now, what do you think about this one?